This is just a big announcement.
The silence in Meri Brown's life was not coincidental. It was not the silence of a woman with nothing to say. It was the silence of a woman who had said it all, given it all, sacrificed it all, and gotten nothing back. For years, Meri was the foundation of KODY Brown's so-called dream family. She was the first wife, the one who stood by him when he was nothing but a man with a dream of having a kingdom through polygamy. The one who flashed her smile on camera, who accepted new wives, who took swallowing her pride when her husband shared pieces of his heart with others. She thought she was living something sacred, something greater than herself. But now, that fantasy had become a horror. We begin with a family gathering. Not the cozy holiday moments TLC marketed to America, but the strained reality. KODY is at the forefront, waving his hands around Coyote Pass. His voice is booming, shrill, and confident. Robin is beside him, agreeing fervently, her big, tearful eyes drinking in every word as if they were scripture. Christine sits at a greater distance, already disengaged, rolling her eyes when she is sure no one's looking. Janelle slumps back in her chair, arms folded, no longer even feigning to believe in the fantasy. And then there's Meri. She sits quietly, hands folded in her lap, her eyes locked on KODY. But she is not listening anymore, not the way she used to. She is observing him, watching his act. Seeing the way he spins guarantees that he will never follow through. He talks about unity, about family, about creating the future together. But every person in that room is aware of the reality. There is no unity. There is no common dream. There is only KODY's ego, KODY's vision, and KODY's favorite pick. But Meri doesn't cut him off. She doesn't roll her eyes. She doesn't yell. Her silence is stronger than anything she might have ever spoken. Because her silence is no longer surrender. Her silence is judgment. It's the courtroom of her heart, and in that courtroom, KODY Brown already stands convicted. KODY ignored Meri for years. He told her bluntly, brutally, that their marriage was dead. That there was no intimacy, no heat, no relationship anymore. He said it shamelessly, remorselessly, as if her hurt didn't matter. To KODY, Meri was a prop, convenient when she acted her part, discardable when she was no longer fulfilling his script. But Meri was not expendable. She waited. And waiting, in the end, can be sharper than any knife. Behind closed doors, Meri wept. She prayed. She doubted her value. She wondered if perhaps KODY was correct. Perhaps she was nothing without him. But every time she wiped away her tears, she emerged stronger. Every time she stood before the mirror and said, "I deserve more," she believed it a little bit more. Her silence was not weakness. It was training. It was strategy. She had seen Christine struggle. She had seen Janelle rebel. She had watched Robin cry her way into power. And along the way, Meri learned. She learned that confronting KODY directly only fueled his ego. She learned that silence unsettled him. And she learned that one day, when she finally made her move, he would never know it was coming. The breaking point was not fireworks. It was not screaming fights or doors slammed. It was in that quiet family reunion, with KODY yelling over land he would never be able to own, over dreams that were already dust. And then, in that moment, Meri made her decision. She was finished. Finished waiting. Finished begging. Finished living with lies. She did not tell him that day. She did not storm out. She did not perform for the cameras. She simply sat there, silent, calm, her eyes steady as KODY's voice filled the room. And in her silence was a power he could not recognize. Because for the first time in her life, Meri's silence was not compliance. It was liberation. Later, she sat by herself in her room. The cameras had been shut off. The house was still. She stared at a picture frame containing the Brown family, smiling faces, fake happiness, the pretense of togetherness. She ran her fingertips across the glass, and for the first time she did not feel melancholy. She felt detachment, as though that family was already a memory, a tale that no longer personally pertained to her. She whispered to herself, "This is the beginning of her new life, the beginning of her freedom." The beginning of the chapter that Kody would never control. And though he did not know it yet, though he was still boasting about land, about legacies, about wives who no longer believed in him, the truth was already set. Meri's silence had spoken the final verdict. The family dream was dead, and Meri's new life had already begun. The quiet had shattered something within Meri, but what came next wasn't collapse. It was awakening. For the first time in decades, Meri started living not as Kody's first wife, not as the background shadow, not as the woman who was always being compared to Robin, Christine or Janelle, but as Meri, a woman, an individual, a soul with her own light. And like any awakening, it began softly. It started with little shows of rebellion, little ones that Kody didn't even catch. She no longer waited on his phone calls. She no longer showed up to every family event, particularly the ones that felt like calculated productions for TLC. She no longer dressed for him, no longer gentled her words for him, no longer made herself smaller so that he could expand. For Meri, the silence that had held her back had become the armor that set her free. She began to forge her own world, her own businesses, her own friends, her own havens far from Kody's disapproving eye. She would go back to her inn in Utah, Lizzie's Heritage Inn, and there, in that old house with the echoes of her forebears, she felt a strength she had not experienced in years. It was hers, her haven, and unlike Kody's expensive boasts of Coyote Pass, it was real, physical, all hers. At the inn, out of range of cameras and tension, Meri became herself again. She laughed heartier. She smiled longer. She talked freely, free of his judgment. She received guests who saw her not as Kody's wife, but as a woman on her own 2 feet. And each time she drove home to Flagstaff, each time she entered a house where Kody grudgingly recognized her as a human being, the contrast struck her like a judgment given from the bench. With him, she was invisible. Without him, she was alive. This was the awakening. But freedom is never simple. And for Meri, each step forward was accompanied by flashes of the prison she was still escaping. There were nights she still wept. Nights that loneliness engulfed her. Nights that she wondered whether leaving altogether would result in losing not only Kody, but the family she had built her life around. For Meri, family was everything. It was her purpose, her faith, her identity. And leaving Kody meant leaving behind a world she had given up for. But then there were the moments that made her remember why she had to continue. Moments such as Kody dismissing her in front of the children, jesting cruelly about their non-existent relationship. Moments such as seeing Robin play him with tears and him ignoring her altogether. Moments such as sitting in family meetings where her voice was muffled even before it had left her mouth. Every insult, every snub, every rejection was another clang of the judge's gavel in her soul, again and again ruling that the marriage was over. The waking increased louder when Meri started reaching out to Christine and Janelle. Although their destinies were dissimilar, their suffering was parallel. Christine, fiery and fearless, had already decided to leave. Janelle, practical and earthy, was forging her own path. And Meri, the quiet one, saw that she was not isolated as much as she believed. They started building a silent partnership. Not a legal one, not official, but a bond created in mutual betrayal, mutual pain, and mutual strength. Behind closed doors, Christine encouraged her. "Meri, you're so much better than this. Don't let him fool you otherwise." Janelle, with her even-keel logic, added, "Kody lives on control. The instant you take it away from him, he's powerless." These words counted, because for so long, Meri had thought her value equated to Kody. But Christine and Janelle reminded her, her value was hers. The wake-up call became irrevocable when Meri began to develop habits of independence. She planned vacations. She invested in her business. She hung out with friends who encouraged her. She established space where once there had been desperation. And Kody noticed, not with alarm, but with ire. He accosted her one night, his voice booming, accusing her of abandoning the family, of turning her back on her vows. But Meri did not cringe this time. She did not apologize. She did not beg for his attention. She regarded him quietly, arms crossed, and simply stated, "What family, Kody?" There was a silence following that was deafening. Because for the first time, Meri did not speak in order to be heard by him, but to hear herself. And in those words, she knew she had already gone. The awakening was no longer a sense. It was a deed. She had set her foot into her new life. And Kody, he couldn't have prevented it. Liberty is never bestowed upon anyone without conflict. It is wrestled for, fought for, clawed from the hand of the individuals who previously ruled over them. And Meri was about to see that Kody and Robin would not relinquish her without a battle. When Christine walked away, it had been dramatic but final. When Janelle distanced herself, it was calculated, practical. But Meri's silence unnerved Kody the most, because silence in his world was dangerous. Silence meant control was slipping. Silence meant she was no longer playing by his rules. And when a man like Kody senses his grip weakening, he doesn't loosen it, he tightens it. It began subtly. Kody began spinning tales to the kids. He referred to Meri as disconnected, as prioritizing business over family. He colored her self-sufficiency as selfishness, her silence as betrayal. To those who still listened, he planted doubt, suspicion, and guilt. Robin, too, joined the campaign. Tears became her weapon. She would cry in front of Meri, accusing her of creating division, of abandoning the family at their most fragile moment. She spoke of unity, but practiced manipulation, turning Meri's search for freedom into an attack on the so-called family dream. And at the back, the whispers became louder. Meri doesn't care anymore. Meri is cold. Meri has left us in her heart. For years, Meri may have crumpled under this. She may have run back, all desperate to prove herself, desperate to mend what was never hers to mend. But now the silence was her protection. She let them speak. She let them blame. Because for once, their words no longer controlled her reality. But there is also resistance of another kind. It is resistance through command over money, and here Kody hit hardest. Coyote Pass had been the symbol of his dream, a communal land, a family legacy. Yet behind the scenes, it became a battleground. Christine walked away without insisting on her share. Janelle, ever practical, struggled for what she had contributed. But Meri? Kody thought she could still be pushed into submission. He informed her that she had no right, that her involvement was spiritual, not financial, that she was just a placeholder, a name on the family tree, but not an equal in the empire. But Meri had receipts. She had bank records. She had contracts. She had years of documented contributions, and while she did not shout about them, she kept them close. Like Christine's confidential envelope in court, Meri's silence now concealed the very evidence that could dismantle Kody's empire of control. The tension was palpable. Family meetings turned into interrogations. Kody's voice grew louder, Robin's tears grew heavier, and Meri's silence became more unbearable for them both. Because silence cannot be manipulated. Silence cannot be debated. Silence cannot be controlled. But Kody, restless and prideful, began to unravel. He snapped not just at Meri, but at Janelle and even the children. His facade of control broke, and for the first time, those around him glimpsed the naked rage underneath. Rage not at betrayal, but at losing control. Robin's terror grew only. She pleaded with Meri in quiet moments. Don't do this. Don't leave us. Don't out him. He's just afraid. He's just trying to protect what's his. But Meri's quiet reply was like a dagger cloaked in velvet. It was never his to begin with. The resistance was at its highest when rumors of legal filings started circulating. Court dates, property squabbles, financial revelations were whispered about. Behind the cameras of TLC, the Browns had concealed their cracks for years, editing reality into a realistic tale. But behind the scenes, a different story was being written, one that could no longer be manipulated. And at the heart of it was Meri, the quiet one, the underestimated one, the quiet strength of the one that now threatened to tear apart decades of manipulation. But resistance comes not only from without, it is from within. And Meri struggled with it every day. The draw of family, the burden of history, fear of truly being alone. These were shackles she still bore. Some nights, she questioned whether Cody's voice was correct, whether Robin's tears were anything more. And still, each morning she came back to her inn, each time standing in golden sunlight away from their shadows, she knew the chains were already broken. The question was not whether she would walk away at all. The question was when, and that when would arrive sooner than anyone could have anticipated. Because the resistance was going to run headlong into something greater, evidence, proof, and a courtroom where Cody's voice could no longer shout down the silence. For years, Cody thought Meri was passive, silent, a woman who could be boxed in with guilt, with shame, with reminders of family duty. But silence, when held long enough, becomes power. And Meri's silence was not empty. It was filled with evidence. The truth came out not in screaming arguments or dramatic scenes, but in whispered conversations. At holiday gatherings, when tension became too much to bear, Meri would step away. She would exit the room, but she was not backing down. She was recalling. Each receipt, each deposit, each payment she had made to Coyote Pass, to the houses, to the so-called family enterprises. Cody had always believed he could blur the lines. That as the patriarch, his voice could override the paperwork. That his narrative would bury the facts. But he underestimated Meri's patience and her meticulous record-keeping. She received checks made payable to Family Traditions, LLC. She received bank records of deposits that somehow disappeared into K&R Holdings. She had evidence of her portion of the TLC profits, redirected before it ever found its way to her. Meri never told Cody these words, but she lived by them. Paper doesn't lie. People do. The breakthrough came when rumors of legal entanglement reached the family. Christine and Janelle had already laid out segments of the money trail in court. But Meri, hitherto, had stayed in the background, neither entirely on the side of Christine and Janelle, nor entirely bound to Cody and Robin. All that changed the moment she entered her lawyer's office. The attorney, a tough woman with decades of family and money lawsuits under her belt, sat in quiet regard as Meri laid out the documents on the desk. Contracts, transfers, emails. "I held everything back," Meri declared, her words firm. "I knew someday the silence would require proof." The attorney leaned forward, reading over the documents. She clicked her pen against one signature line. "Cody signed this." "Yes," Meri answered, her arms folded. "And then informed me that I wasn't included." That day, Meri ceased to be merely the silent wife. She became something much more threatening to Cody's dynasty, a witness. The courtroom was the theater. Christine and Janelle had already laid out their proof. The phony transfers, the nanny's check, the TLC deals routed through back accounts. It was devastating. But Cody still had the fantasy that Meri, his most loyal, would never betray him. That fantasy exploded when Meri approached the witness stand. Her calmness was unwavering. Her silence turned into something even more foreboding. Deliberate words. She talked quietly of the years on the sidelines, of being informed her funds were family, as she watched them drain into Robin's home mortgage and Cody's ego ventures. She cried not at all. She did not seethe. She merely set forth the facts. Document after document, transfer after transfer. And then the envelope. A thick manila folder full of papers stamped in bold red, confidential. The bailiff carried it to the judge. The court grew silent. Even Cody's bluster faltered as he realized Meri's silence had been hiding the sharpest blade. Inside were emails, Cody's own words, instructing accountants to move Meri's funds where she won't see them. Robin gasped. The jury leaned forward, and Cody's face turned crimson. It wasn't just evidence of financial betrayal. It was evidence of intentional deception, of cutting her out while taking everything she gave. Meri's testimony shifted the room. Christine watched with tears in her eyes. Janelle's fists unclenched, relief washing over her face. For years, they had begged Meri to see it, to acknowledge it. And now, here she was, not only seeing it, but exposing it. Cody, red-faced and fuming, could barely contain himself. He slammed his fist against the table, earning a sharp rebuke from the judge. "Meri was always part of this family," he shouted, his voice breaking. "She's twisting it. She's betraying me." But the papers on the judge's desk spoke louder than his rage. And for the first time, it was not Meri's silence that hung over the courtroom. It was Cody's. When court recessed, reporters scrambled. The headlines wrote themselves: "Silent Wife Speaks Out. Meri Brown Exposes Financial Lies." Outside the courthouse, Meri said nothing to the cameras. She didn't need to. Her evidence had spoken for her. And in that moment, the world finally saw what Cody had feared most: that Meri's silence had never been weakness. It had been preparation. But evidence, as powerful as it was only part of the story. Because although Meri had revealed the deceit in print, the emotional reckoning was still to come. A reckoning that would not merely call out Cody's empire, but compel Meri to consider how much of her future she would be willing to rebuild from the ruins. And as the gavel came down to close the day's session, Meri looked back. Her gaze locked with Cody's for an instant, and in that gaze was not hatred, not fear, but a message. It's over. The courtroom had grown used to spectacle by this point. Christine's evidence had shaken the walls. Janelle's testimony had stripped away the illusion of unity. But it was Meri's quiet revelation, the manila envelope of confidential proof, that cut to the bone. By now, all the jurors knew what had been hidden for decades. Cody's dream family wasn't mutual. It was staged, and the silence of one wife, the one everyone had written off, was now the most lethal weapon. Freedom, like truth, isn't free. And for Meri, that cost would soon be vetted. The next day in court, the defense changed strategies. Until now, Cody's lawyers had concentrated on discrediting Christine and Janelle as bitter, jealous ex-wives. But Meri, she made it difficult. For over 30 years, Cody had publicly depicted her as loyal, faithful, the one who stayed. Now, with her standing firmly against him, the defense had no other option but to chip away at her credibility. Their attorney, Mr. Croft, stood up with a grin that barely hid his desperation. "Mrs. Brown," he started, walking slowly back and forth, "you stood silent for years when these purported financial embezzlements were going on. Why should the jury trust you now, when your long silence speaks of assent?" The question hit hard, but Meri did not blink. "I was quiet because I trusted him," she answered calmly. "Because each time I asked, I was told I didn't get it, or that it was being addressed. But trusting a falsehood does not render it true." Croft inched closer. "Or maybe you were in on it. Maybe you only spoke up now because Christine and Janelle turned you against him." Meri's eyes became slits. For an instant, the shame of the years, the burden of the outsider wife, welled up within her. But she took a long, slow breath. "No," she said with conviction. "I spoke out because I knew my silence was shielding the wrong man. I spoke out because the truth has to be louder than his lies." The gallery exploded into whispers. Even the judge leaned forward, his eyes focused on her with fresh curiosity. Outside the courtroom, the story changed once more. The press had long since dubbed Christine as the warrior, Janelle as the planner. Now Meri was the wild card, the one nobody guessed would turn against the group. Headlines screamed, "Meri Brown's testimony turns the case on its head. Silent wife takes center stage as star witness." But while her courage sent the world into cheers, Meri herself was battling uncertainty. That evening, sitting alone in her rented flat, she browsed messages on her phone. There were some that supported her, admiring her courage. There were others that were vicious, blaming her for being disloyal, for tearing the family apart. Then there was the message that chilled her, from a number she did not recognize. 4 words: "You don't know everything." There was an image attached, a fuzzy scan of what appeared to be another piece of financial paper. One she'd never seen before. Her heart raced. Had she caught up to something? Was there more to Cody's deceit? The following morning, she took it to her lawyer. The attorney examined the photo attentively. "This isn't one of yours," she asserted. "This appears to have been taken from a different account. Offshore, perhaps. If this is authentic, it's not merely concealment. It might be fraud on a national scale. Meri's stomach knotted. She had already taken a gamble getting into that courtroom. But if this was true, Cody's deceptions weren't merely about Coyote Pass or the TLC payments. They might extend far deeper, into law-breaking country. The lawyer hunched closer. Meri, if we go there, it will create a new door. One that could pull you in further than you plan to go. Are you prepared for that? Meri closed her eyes. She remembered the years of being belittled, the manner in which her love had been used against her, the numerous times she had swallowed her voice just to maintain harmony. She opened her eyes. Yes, she breathed. I won't be quiet anymore. Back in court, the jury could feel the shift. Cody's anger was no longer controlled. It was volcanic. His outburst grew louder. He sneered at Christine, glared at Janelle, and tried desperately to catch Meri's eye, but she never looked back. The judge warned him twice to control himself. And then came the moment that electrified the courtroom. Meri's lawyer rose, holding a new exhibit. Your Honor, we received new documentation pertaining to this case. Evidence indicating that not only were funds taken from Family Traditions LLC, but that there were secret accounts abroad. Gasps ran through the room. Cody jumped up from his seat. This is a lie, he bellowed, his voice breaking. They're making this up. They're conspiring against me. The judge's gavel came down hard. Mr. Brown, another outburst and you're out. Robin grasped his arm, her cheeks smeared with tears. But the jury was no longer watching her. They were staring at Meri. The silent wife had not merely spoken out. She had shattered the whole defense. But whereas the courtroom was ablaze with secrets, Meri's judgment was not merely legal. It was personal. That evening, after court, she returned home to find her voicemail full. Not from lawyers or reporters, but from family. Nieces, nephews, even old friends from the faith community. Some begged her to stop, to protect the family's name. Others urged her to keep going, to finally end the lie. And then came the call she hadn't expected. Her daughter's voice. Mom, I'm proud of you. Meri sat in silence, tears streaming down her face. For all the years she felt she was failing, for all the nights she felt she was forgotten, that one sentence cut through the clutter. For the first time in decades, she felt free. But freedom, as always, comes with shadows. The anonymous number sent another message late that night. If you think you've seen the worst, you're wrong. This time there was no attachment. Only words. Meri looked at the screen, her heart racing. Was it a threat? A warning? A promise of a darker truth yet to be revealed? She didn't know. But she knew one thing. The reckoning wasn't over. It had only just begun. The courtroom had grown used to spectacle by this point. Christine's evidence had shaken the walls. Janelle's testimony had stripped away the illusion of unity. But it was Meri's quiet revelation, the manila envelope of confidential proof, that cut to the bone. By then, all the jurors knew what had lain hidden for years. Cody's so-called family dream was not shared. It was staged. And one wife's silence, the one everyone had written off, was now the most lethal weapon. But liberty, like truth, is expensive. And for Meri, that expense was about to be weighed. The new evidence Meri's team introduced, whispers of offshore accounts, secret transfers hidden beyond the desert soil of Flagstaff, hung heavy in the air. For years, Cody's power came not just from his words, but from the assumption that no one could ever prove otherwise. He thrived in the shadows between family loyalty and public image. But now, those shadows had been pulled into the light. Cody's face spoke for itself. Red-faced, angry, veins bulging, eyes scanning the jury as if he hoped to will them into believing him. Robin sat next to him, her tissue torn from the intensity of her hold, mascara smears smeared on her cheeks. Across the aisle sat Christine and Janelle, unflappable, serene, resolute. And Meri, silent no more, not sobbing, not screaming. Just there, strong. Silence had been her greatest gift to Cody for years. Her voice was now his downfall. Cody's lawyer attempted to recover. He frantically argued the new documents were fakes, that they be struck. But the judge, tired of the incessant interruptions and stonewalling, denied them individually. "Mr. Croft," the judge growled, "you can present your case, but you will not silence evidence." Those were words which reverberated like a prophecy. Witness after witness, they verified what Meri had presented. Accountants, contractors, even an ex-TLC employee who produced emails to indicate that lump sum payments destined for family distribution had been funneled into accounts no wife ever saw. It wasn't betrayal. It was leadership masquerading as theft. The jury wrote rapidly. Fingers flew on court reporters' stenotype machines. And Cody's empire further cracked. Outside of court, the consequences flew faster than wildfire. TLC boards were abuzz. Did Kody steal from the wives? Twitter was trending. Meri speaks and Kody exposed. Even media sources that previously romanticized the family situation now painted Kody as a man disintegrating because of his own deceptions. But the most agonizing fallout wasn't on the internet. It was inside the family itself. Children who had been split by allegiance were starting to ask questions. Why did Dad tell us there wasn't money when there was? Why did Mom have to battle in court for what's hers? Some wouldn't take Kody's calls. Others defended Christine and Janelle publicly on social media. The younger generation wasn't afraid to defect from rank for the first time. And Meri? She emerged as the bridge. One child at a time started messaging. Little words, plain words, but each one hit like a lightning. "Thank you for standing up for the truth." It all boiled down to a late afternoon. The case of the plaintiffs rested. The jury was about to deliberate. The air was charged with anticipation. And then Kody lashed out. Slapping his hand on the table, he got up, booming voice. "This is not justice. This is betrayal. You people turned against me. My wives, my kids, even you, Meri. For everything I gave you." The courtroom murmured in shock. Robin pulled on his arm, mouthing, "Sit down, please." But he shook her off. His eyes contorted, his voice ragged. "You think you're free now? You think outing me makes you a saint? You're wrecking everything. The family, the fantasy, the legacy." The judge's gavel came down. "Order!" But the tantrum had already caused the damage. The jury had not seen a leader. They had seen a desperate individual, self-destructing over truth beyond his grasp. And in the public gallery, Meri did not blink. She merely mouthed under her breath, "You destroyed it yourself." That evening, when the courthouse cleared out, Meri lingered in her car longer than normal. She observed Christine and Janelle walking together, softly laughing despite the tempest. She witnessed Robin holding onto the arm of Kody as he stormed into the parking lot. She felt the divide more acutely than ever. And yet she wasn't broken, because silence, once her prison, had become her weapon. And now, as she gazed at the courthouse shining against the Flagstaff night, she knew it had also become her shield. Just when Meri had thought the worst was behind her, her phone buzzed. The same unknown number. This time only 3 words. He hid more. There was a location pin attached. Somewhere isolated, somewhere connected to Coyote Pass. Her heart pounded. She kept it hidden from everyone. Not yet. Because if what she suspected was true, Kody's downfall wasn't complete. The courtroom might have stolen his finances, but what was buried in the earth of Coyote Pass could steal something far bigger. The courtroom fight was finished. The verdict had been uttered, the damages given, the gavel dropped. Kody's kingdom was in shambles. The money, the power, the illusion of the perfect plural family. Christine and Janelle went free. Meri stood taller than she had in decades. Robin cried, still holding the shattered remnants of a dream she had helped create. But for Meri, freedom was not about finality. Freedom was about questions. The message tormented her. He hid more. The pin on her phone flashed at her like a heartbeat, drawing her to a truth she wasn't certain she wanted. For years, Coyote Pass had been their promised land. Kody's dream that he held out in front of them, the soil upon which they would leave their mark. And now it was all something else. A field of lies, a gravesite for secrets, and perhaps, just perhaps, the site where Kody had buried the final piece of his deceit. Late one night, Meri drove out to the land. The air was crisp, the dirt roads empty. The mountains rose up in the distance, quiet observers of years of promises unfulfilled. She got out of the car, her feet sinking into the parched earth. The wind sliced across her face, carrying with it the distant whispers of laughter, arguments, tears, the ghosts of a family that had dreamed once. The pin led her to a spot on the far edge of the property, a corner no cameras had ever filmed, no wives had ever visited. The ground looked disturbed, as though something had been dug up or buried. Meri's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone's flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, glinting off something half buried in the dirt. A corner of a metal box. She knelt, sweeping away dirt. Her breath caught. It was old, heavy, locked, but unmistakably real. Anything could be inside that box. More accounting, secret deeds, even something that went beyond betrayal and into territory that was criminal. Her chest constricted. If she opened it, there'd be no going back. Behind her, a revving engine sounded far in the distance. Headlights moved incrementally down the gravel road. She stood stock still. No one should have known she was here. The light advanced, brighter, piercing the desert darkness until it shone on her face. She covered her eyes, her heart racing. Then a door slammed shut. Crunching footsteps on gravel. "Meri!" a voice bellowed out. Low! Harsh! Familiar! Her blood turned to ice. It wasn't Christine. It wasn't Janelle. It wasn't an attorney or a reporter. It was him, Kody. Meri's hand tightened around the edge of the box. The beam of her flashlight shook as she lifted it toward the sound. Kody's silhouette stood just feet away, his face shadowed, his body rigid with anger. "I told you," he growled, his voice trembling with fury. "You don't know everything." Her heart thudded so hard it could have shattered the stillness of the night. The box lying between them, the truth hidden within it, the land that was going to be their future, all came to this point. Would she open it? Would she reveal what he had struggled so hard to conceal? Or would the shadows of Coyote Pass consume the truth forever? The wind screamed through the desolate wasteland as the two of them were locked, face to face. One silent, one raging, the box lying in the ground between them. And then, the screen goes to black. To be continued.